regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Glad you're with me on the program today. We're going to be talking with Ryan Petty about the Surgeon General's announcement that we need to start treating gun violence as a public health crisis. Yeah, very suspicious timing for this, given that the Biden administration says violent crime is plummeting around the country, right? Including homicides off of their highs in 2020 substantially. And yet now is when Vivek Murthy says, oh, no. And we can't make it political, he says, right? You got to separate politics from this. But we need Congress to pass all these gun control laws. Yeah, got to start treating gun ownership like we treated smoking back in the day, Vivek Murthy says. Now, what he doesn't say is that while youth smoking rates have declined across the United States, there are actually more teens and adolescents who are smoking pot than tobacco now, right? The law of unintended consequences. Oh, no, we don't want to talk about that. No. Just start treating guns like we do cigarettes and tobacco, maybe vapes, and, problem solved. All we need are just a few common sense regulations on your right to keep and bear arms. Yeah. We're going to get to that conversation with Ryan Petty in just one second. Before we do, though, let's talk about this for a minute. Economists warn that massive tax hikes could devastate your IRA and 401k account as the stock market braces for impact. With inflation on the rise, global uncertainty looming, it is clear why central banks and savvy Americans are turning to gold. If you haven't had your eye on gold, it's time to make it a priority. Priority Gold. Trust their team of proven professionals to help you diversify your savings with gold and silver. Call 1-800-405-GOLD or visit PriorityGold.com/golden for a free gold info guide. Plus, see if you qualify for free shipping and storage. Experts agree that physical gold is one of the best ways to fortify your savings, no matter the economic environment. Act now to get your portfolio working for you while the market's golden. Call 1-800-405-GOLD to speak with a gold specialist or visit PriorityGold.com/golden to learn more. That's 1-800-405-GOLD. And now let's get to our conversation with Ryan Petty. His response, not only to Murthy's call to disarm, I guess, but the rather unusual and suspicious timing of the Surgeon General's announcement. Take a look and listen. Ryan, thanks so much for coming on the program. It's good to see you, sir.
Cam, always great to be with you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. And we've seen sort of the, I guess, the latest piece of Joe Biden's red hot gun control summer drop today. Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, proclaiming that gun violence should be treated as a public health crisis, says that we should remove politics from the equation before talking about all of the new gun control laws that he wants Congress to pass, Ryan, which that to me is just the perfect summation of the duplicitous nature of the Surgeon General's announcement today.
His announcement, Cam, is laden with politics, and he knows it. They know it. This is a move in, my view. What they want to do is try to lay claim to some moral high ground, right? So we know that the Second Amendment is a recognition of our God-given right to protect ourselves, God-given right to self-defense, to protect ourselves, our homes, our loved ones, and to protect and defend liberty. It doesn't get much more moral, or there isn't much higher ground than that, in my view, Cam. And so what they're trying to do and what they've wanted to do for years, and this is just the latest salvo in their barrage of attacks on the Second Amendment, as you noted this year, what they're trying to do is lay claim to some moral high ground. If they can convince the average American that this is not, this is a health crisis, that this is something that needs to be scientifically studied, and that we need to come to some scientific conclusions about how to solve the epidemic, as they would call it, of gun violence in the United States, then they can lay claim to some moral high ground and perhaps move the debate and discussion towards gun control, or their ultimate aims, which we know is to treat the Second Amendment as a second-class right, and one in which the government can determine and dictate how that right is exercised by the American people.
I think you're absolutely right about that. And that's why this is so craven. You know, Murthy himself had, back when he was confirmed as Surgeon General the first time around, swore to the Senate that he, quote, did not intend to use my office as Surgeon General as a bully pulpit on gun control. I guess the doctor's note has expired, Ryan, because now that's exactly what he is doing here. And as you say, this is an attempt to claim some sort of moral high ground, right? That if you are not on the side of those who are looking to restrict the right to keep and bear arms. So we'll talk about some of the specific policies that Murphy has endorsed here. Then you're not on the side of the angels, right? You're wearing the black hat. Because this is the sort of, existential fight between good versus evil. President Biden, when he was running for president, talked about the firearms industry as the enemy. That's how he referred to gun makers, right? Not violent criminals, not home invaders, not gang members, but gun makers and gun sellers. They're the enemy to the Biden administration. And Murthy's comments today, I think, prove that. And as I said, he told the Associated Press, it's now time for us to take the issue out of the realm of politics and put it in the realm of public health, the way we did with smoking more than a half century ago. So, I got to say, Ryan, if you're saying we're going to take politics out of this, and yet you are entirely relying on politicians to, pass these proposals. Again, I don't think the American people are really going to buy this. I honestly don't think this is going to have much of an impact on the public debate. I also think it's very strange that this comes at a time in which the Biden administration itself has been pointing to declining violent crime rates. They say, the FBI statistics show the violent crime is down around the country. Homicide is down dramatically over the past couple of years in most U.S. cities, which begs the question, why now? Why is Murthy declaring now we've got a crisis, a public health crisis in terms of gun violence? Is it because the numbers are so bad, or is it because election day is getting closer?
It's 100% about the election. And quite frankly, I think it's a fear that the Biden administration has that they're about to lose the next election. And so what they're hoping to do with this declaration is put the wheels of the federal bureaucracy in motion prior to the election. Look, if Biden wins, he can continue to, push the cart down the path. But if he loses, this declaration by the Surgeon General will have an impact within the federal bureaucracy. And it will be one more thing the next president would have to undo. And so I think there's a very cynical and even sinister motivation behind doing this at this time. Quite frankly, I asked the question earlier, why now? Why? I would have assumed they would have tried to do this early in the Biden administration, early in the term. And I really do take a very cynical view of this. This is designed to push the bureaucracy and the powers that be and the funding mechanisms, as importantly as anything, to do more research on this. And again, it's an attempt to stake claim to some moral arguments about the Second Amendment. The funny thing, though, Cam, is it's all based on a falsehood, right? In declaring this, the Surgeon General repeated the oft debunked statistic that gun violence is the leading cause of death for kids, right? Youths, they've now used the term youth to sort of obfuscate the idea that they were saying kids before, but that statistic included 18 and 19-year-olds who are adults. Mm-hmm. And they do that very deliberately. They look, the motivation here, and I agree, this isn't going to move the needle for Second Amendment supporters like you and me. It's not going to have much impact on the gun control activists on the other side, although they're probably cheering today that this action was taken. But it does, I think, chip away at a minimum. It chips away at that middle ground, those middle Americans that say to themselves, "Yeah, I believe in the Second Amendment. I think it's important, but it should have restrictions, or it's okay for government to infringe on the Second Amendment." And if they're doing it because kids are dying and it's the leading cause, well, we should treat it like smoking, like we did 50 years ago. So that's what I worry about. I worry about that middle of the road American that isn't, they might have a handgun for home defense. They might have a hunting rifle. They might go, hunting occasionally, but they're not really understanding the larger motivation in doing this. And that's my concern about the action that was taken today.
And I think that's a legitimate concern, because you're right. Again, it's all in the framing, right? We're the reasonable ones. We're the rational ones. We just want these common sense. Let's not even call them restrictions, just common sense regulations, right? And we won't call it gun control. They're just gun safety regulations. Who could be opposed to these things that we want? By gosh, they're just so middle of the road, common sense. No, you're right. That's exactly the framing that we've seen, frankly, I mean, for decades, right? And the gun control lobby is very successful in avoiding conversations that they don't want to have. When Hunter Biden was convicted of federal gun crimes, none of the gun control groups wanted to talk about that. And the media briefly noted that none of the gun control groups wanted to talk about it. And then they moved on, right? They didn't press Giffords or Brady or Everytown. What do you think about the application of this law? What do you think about the conviction? What do you think about the possibility of prison? They've got their allies in the media. The Associated Press, I mean, even in their write-up of Murphy's proposal today, talked about how, we should ban automatic rifles. I mean, Ryan, the Associated Press and every one of their writers should know the difference between a semi-automatic and a fully automatic. They should know that fully automatic firearms are already heavily regulated under the National Firearms Act. But I think that, again, this is an attempt to scare those sort of low information voters, particularly those non-gun owners, right, who may not know the difference between a machine gun and a AR-15. And we're going to see this, I think, ramp up between now and November. Like, this is not the last step, right? Right now, I think the gun control groups they're the tail wagging the dog in the Biden administration. And what they want, the Biden administration is pushing for. We talked with Pete Friselli last week on the program, former deputy assistant director of the ATF. He said that he has heard that the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention has actually been pressuring the ATF to reclassify Glocks as machine guns. It's a step that so far the ATF has declined to undertake, but he says that type of pressure is coming from the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And I suspect, you talk about the timing of Murthy's announcement. I suspect that the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention might have had a hand in this coming out now. Maybe some pressure was applied to the Surgeon General to, declare gun violence a public health crisis. I know you said you wouldn't do it. You haven't done it to date, but we really need you to step up and do this. And now's the time.
Yeah, with the upcoming presidential debates just around the corner, I'm sure this is another attempt, something that Biden will highlight that he's taking action here. Look, the play to me politically around the election and the Biden campaign in particular is very transparent. They have got to generate some excitement about a president that, quite frankly, doesn't get very many people excited, right, to vote for. So they need reasons to vote for Biden. They need their base out and active and voting and campaigning and donating and all the things that you need to do to win a political race. This is an attempt to not just placate their base, but energize their base. And so, again, I think the gun control groups will view this action by the Surgeon General very positively. They will start messaging around this. You'll start to see we're going to be inundated, I think, with the science of gun control. And to your point, arguments to compel low information voters and voters where the Second Amendment is third, fourth, fifth, sixth on their list of things that they care about. They're going to try to motivate them. Look, the economy is not doing as well as any Biden press release would lead you to believe. And they know that, the economy and economic issues, those kitchen table issues we talk about all the time, are the ones that are really driving voters in this election. And they're very concerned because, you and I know things are not as good as they claim they are. And so they've got to get you to the polls and voting on some of these second, third, fourth, fifth most important issues to many voters. And so that's really the play here. It's transparently political. To claim otherwise is laughable. And for the Surgeon General, look, the claim that it's not political is laughable. And then his second argument is, that gun violence is the leading, cause of death among kids. And we know that's a lie too. So they've started off by, obfuscating their true intentions and lying about the research. And unfortunately, that's the state of the debate at this point in our nation. And I look forward to the day where we can have a genuine debate. We should be talking about gun violence, but we should be talking about it in the context of gun violence in our inner cities and what's going on there and the lawlessness that's driving much of the gun violence statistics that they cite. We also ought to have a conversation about suicide and what that means and the impact that has on the numbers, Cam. So until we're ready to sort of set aside, I would say until the gun control activists are ready to set aside the rhetoric and have an actual conversation about what's driving the numbers of the United States, this is just, it will be nothing more than pure politics.
I think you're absolutely right about that. And just to touch on the second argument that Murthy makes, that we've seen this rise in gun violence among juveniles. The leading cause of death for children over the age of 1 and adolescents up to 19, right? Because if you include infant mortality, then that skews the statistics. All of a sudden, gun violence is not the leading cause of death. If you cut it off at 17 and you don't include young adults, then that changes the metrics as well. I'm reminded of Mark Twain's comment about lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? You can make these numbers whatever you want them to be. But I agree with you. I think it's kind of a mistake to dwell too much on the games that they're playing with the numbers, right? Because then, again, so you don't care about these kids that are dying, right? That's the response. You want to argue about the statistics, but we know that these numbers are going up. We also know, Ryan, that serious juvenile crimes are going up, right? Again, if we're talking about trying to reduce gun violence among juveniles, okay, we have to start with the fact that they're not old enough to buy a gun legally. So things like universal background checks aren't going to touch juveniles who are illegally acquiring firearms. That, to me, I think is something that Murthy and the Democrats just completely ignore, right? We've got cases, I've covered a couple of stories just in the past weeks. You've got 12, 13-year-olds that are stealing cars, running them into the front of gun stores to conduct these sort of smash and grab robberies, right? And what happens? Their parents are called. A lot of times they're released to the custody of their parents. They're not even taken to juvenile detention. The juvenile justice system looks for ways to extricate these troubled teens from any sort of consequence for their actions, right? If we're going to talk about gun violence and we're going to talk about what's going on with our nation's youth, we have to talk about everything. We can't just talk. And that's the problem here. This is it's not a public health solution that Murthy's offering. It's a gun control solution. All we have to do, according to him, is just restrict the rights of law-abiding adults, of responsible adults, and then, we'll see the numbers change. And it is more complicated than that. It is more difficult than that. And it must encompass a conversation that is broader than our right to keep and bear arms.
You're 100% right, Cam. When you talk about the smash and grab, there's some adult that's manipulating those 12 and 13-year-olds, or some adult that's giving them that idea. Whether they, I've heard the arguments that now they see these things in violent video games like GTA and other things, and that's true. That they're probably getting some ideas from the video games, but what we saw with the gang violence epidemic back in the 80s was that there was a deliberate effort by gang members to use juveniles as drug mules to deliver drugs, to move to do a lot of the illegal things that the gang members knew that they would spend hard time in prison for doing. They were pawning that off on juveniles because they knew the system would treat juveniles differently and they wouldn't really get in trouble. So, until as a society we're willing to recognize what we're allowing adults to do to juveniles, and it's not just the smash and grab gun control things. Children are being trafficked. It makes your stomach turn. Some of the things that are going on with kids in the United States, and we're allowing this garbage to happen in our country until we're ready to have that kind of more. Let's have the moral argument. Let's peel back the layers of the onion, if you will, and let's find out what's actually happening here. That's a debate that I think Second Amendment advocates and possibly gun control advocates, that's what we should be discussing, to your point, Cam. And it's not going to happen until we get, quite frankly, in my view, the gun control activists to step back and say, okay, I know we don't like guns, but let's understand what are the motivations of the person that's operating that firearm, who's pulling the trigger, and what's causing that to happen. And there's a denial on the part of gun control activists to even entertain the question of who and why the trigger is being pulled.
Yeah, and I think that's spot on. I mean, even things like, and this is it's a blanket term, but community gun violence prevention. Mm-hmm. I'm not opposed to that in theory. Because that in theory, there are programs that do exactly what you talk about, right? Things like violence interrupters, the people who go out and try to de-escalate the beefs on the street. I think there's value in those things. Sure. And, frankly, the gun control groups have done a pretty good job of co-opting those types of programs. The problem is that, again, you also have these sort of community gun violence intervention groups that are really just local gun control groups in disguise, right? And their efforts are to stop people from exercising their Second Amendment rights and to make it impossible to actually do so. And that's where the problem. That's one of the problems. But I think that you're right. If the gun control groups, hell, if the Biden administration wanted to have a serious discussion, I know you'd be at that table. If they invited me and I knew it was a serious discussion, it wasn't going to be some sort of photo op, I'd be at that table. And I know that you've turned down opportunities to be at the table because you know that they're not interested in a serious conversation, that it is a photo opportunity. It is about a press release. It is about getting that soundbite on the nightly news. It's not about saving lives.
Yeah, I've turned down multiple opportunities to interact with this. You mentioned the Office of Gun Violence Prevention in the White House. I've been invited multiple times to participate. I'm not going to lend my name or my image to their efforts because I don't think they're actually serious about reducing gun violence, right? I think they're really about gun control and diluting the Second Amendment and what it means to our nation. And so I'm not going to give them an opportunity to use my daughter's name, my name, the tragedy in Parkland. I don't want to give them that. So I avoid those conversations. Now, to your point, if somebody genuinely came along and said, hey, look, let's just recognize the Second Amendment and the fact that it is as important as the First Amendment or any of the other amendments to the Constitution. Let's just start with that as the basis. And we intend no harm to the Second Amendment. I mean, can you imagine that conversation starting that way and to say, okay, we respect it as much as you do. Now let's work together to figure out how do we reduce gun violence in our inner cities? How do we work on the problem of suicide in that's plaguing our nation? What are the underlying causes for these things, and how do we address them without restricting the rights of law-abiding gun owners? Wow, can you imagine what we could do? We put men on the moon, Cam. I know we can solve this problem if we'll come at it genuinely. But these attempts, like today's, the announcement from the Surgeon General, are just disingenuous attempts to politicize and again stake a moral high ground in the debate over whether or not the Second Amendment means what it means. It means what it says, and if we could get past that, we could solve this problem. But unfortunately, I don't believe most gun control activists are willing to sit down and have a conversation with somebody like you or me and really try to solve the problem.
I think that you're right, but listening to you, Ryan, maybe we shouldn't leave it up to them. Maybe we should actually put an event like that together and invite them to the table and see what their response is. We should kick around that idea in the future.
I think it's a wonderful idea, and I think we can find those folks that believe that gun violence is a problem. I'm living proof gun violence is a problem, but it's what caused it, right? I believe there are folks out there like you and me that would be willing to have that discussion and debate, and that's an approach we have to take. I think we have to defend the Second Amendment. And in that regard, I don't want to cede ground or territory at all to them. And if they're willing to meet us on those terms, then let's see if we can't push forward here, because there are far too many people dying for a number of reasons. Let's call it what it is. It's gun violence. There's a plague of violent behavior in our nation, and because we do have access to firearms, which is a good thing, they allow us to defend ourselves, and they are a net positive to our society. I still believe that more guns are used in self-defense than they are in crimes. We know that from the statistics, and they're a backstop, an important backstop, a critical backstop in defending liberty. Let's start with that, and then let's figure out, how do we stop these kids from committing crimes and hurting each other and killing each other and all the other things that are plaguing our society. But it's gonna start with helping our youth understand that there are consequences for their actions, and they may not be the same consequence you get as an adult, but there are consequences. And unfortunately, I think we've spent far too long in the era of theories of the left, where we've tried to deny that there are consequences for actions. And I think if we can get back to some level of reality, then we could make some progress on this. Our kids are important. It doesn't matter where you live or where you grow up, what circumstances you grow up. A kid is important, and we should care about them enough to try to do something.
The only thing I would add is we should try to do something that we know works.
Yeah.
Right. And, I go back to David Kennedy and the work that was done in Boston 25 years ago. Right. The Massachusetts Miracle, it was called. And again, juvenile homicides were skyrocketing. The police commissioner in Boston at the time, Bill Bratton, wanted a gun control solution. And David Kennedy was a researcher at Harvard, and he told the chief, he's like, look, you're talking about 14, 15-year-olds. They're not getting their guns legally. So background checks aren't going to help. Right. He worked with the Boston Police Department. They came up with this strategy called Ceasefire, where they identified who are the gangs in Boston, who are the gang members in Boston, who are the most violent gangs, who are the most violent gang members in those gangs. And they called them in because every one of them was on probation or parole, right? And they told them, listen, the days of plea deals are over. If you keep shooting, we're going to put you in federal prison for as long as you possibly can. But if you stop shooting, we're going to get you the help that you need, right? We're going to give you job training. We're going to get you your GED. You need counseling. We're going to get you counseling. We're going to do what we can do to help you chart a different path in life. Juvenile homicides dropped by more than 50% in Boston without new gun control laws on the books, without more police officers on the books. Arrests overall actually fell because they were focused on the most violent offenders. And again, homicides dropped by more than 50%. So, if you want to call this a crisis, fine. But that doesn't mean that gun control is the answer. It doesn't mean that gun control is going to save lives. It is simply going to continue to deepen the divisions in this country. Criminals are going to continue to ignore those laws. And you know what? Again, the problem doesn't get solved. So, Ryan, listen, as always, man, I appreciate you coming on the program. It is always so good talking with you. I love your insight, and I'm glad you could join me on the program today.
Cam, thanks for having me. This is an important discussion, and I pray that we can treat it with the seriousness that it needs to be treated. And as you mentioned, the example in Boston, we know how to solve this, but it's going to require some political will and a willingness to acknowledge that gun control doesn't work and that there are alternatives out there.
Absolutely. Ryan Petty, good to see you, my friend. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
My thanks to Ryan for joining us on the program. By the way, we're going to talk about this tomorrow as well. Dr. Robert Young from Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership is going to be with us on the program. So we're going to get the medical response to the Surgeon General's call to start treating gun violence as a public health crisis. Again, coming up on Wednesday's Cam and Company. Before we get to today's Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our recidivist report, let's talk about this for just 1 second. At the very heart of our democracy lies a principle that we hold sacred: free speech. It's the cornerstone that supports every freedom we cherish. Yet in today's digital age, discussions about our wealth, our rights, and our future are being silenced or overshadowed in mainstream narratives, leaving many feeling voiceless in conversations that are crucial to their financial independence and security. This is where Wealth Protection Research steps in, armed with a mission that's never been more critical. Wealth Protection Research is not a financial advisory firm. They're defenders of free speech, committed to giving a voice to the silenced. Now, they tirelessly seek out financial experts, the voices that challenge prevailing narratives, especially as we navigate the uncertainties of the 2024 election. That's why Wealth Protection Research has created a 2024 Election Wealth Protection Report, highlighting the 3 best ideas for protecting and growing your money heading into the 2024 election. It contains ideas the mainstream media won't touch. Listeners can get it completely free. Just text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy. If you believe in the sanctity of free speech and the importance of financial freedom, then act now. Text IDEAS, IDEAS, to 76626 to claim your free copy of this 2024 Election Protection Report. It's time to widen the scope of what we're told, to hear the ideas the establishment doesn't think you can handle, and to take control of our financial destinies. Text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy. All right, so turning now to today's Armed Citizen story, good deed of the day, and our recidivist report. We will start there with a case out of Virginia, Pennsylvania County, Virginia. Man who admitted to shooting 3 women was convicted of attempted murder 8 years ago, and yet already out and able to allegedly commit these other crimes. The individual in question, 31-year-old Telvin Hairston. He was arrested in Pennsylvania County, supposedly admitted to shooting 3 women, killing one of them. Pennsylvania County Sheriff's Office responded to a report of a shooting in Axton, Virginia around 2:41 p.m. on June 22nd. When they arrived at the scene, they found 3 women suffering from gunshot wounds, all 3 taken to local hospitals for treatment of their wounds, and one of them passed away. All 3 women who were shot, according to a family member, had been related. It was a grandmother and 2 granddaughters. And a cousin said the grandmother passed away from her wounds early Monday morning. Margie Watkins, 82 years old. The other 2 victims of the shooting, identified by their cousin as Raquel Kiana Martin and Kiera Martin. Cousin said both of them had sustained multiple gunshot wounds during the shooting. According to police, one of the victims has been released from the hospital. The other is still in the ICU. Telvin Hairston is facing charges of 2 counts of malicious wounding, 3 counts of use of a firearm in the commission of a felony, 1 count of possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, 1 count of armed burglary, as well as entering a house to rape. According to ABC 13 WSET News, his past run-ins with the law date back to 2016, when he was charged with attempted murder in Martinsville. At the time, Telvin Hairston was arrested in connection to a drive-by shooting. Nobody was injured, but one victim's clothes were actually hit by bullets. So, I mean, it really was just a matter of millimeters. And this individual could have suffered serious injuries. In 2016, Hairston was charged with 6 different crimes, including attempted first-degree murder, shooting a firearm from a car, reckless handling of a firearm, He was found guilty in Martinsville Circuit Court and was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 2016. 8 of those 10 years, however, was immediately suspended. So Hairston only had to do less than 2 years behind bars before he was eligible for parole. His 10 years of probation aren't over yet, so he, could be charged with violating his probation here. But if that original sentence had not been suspended, or 80% of it hadn't been suspended, Mr. Hairston would still be incarcerated and would not have been in a position to allegedly shoot these 3 women and allegedly kill an 82-year-old grandmother. All right, on to today's armed citizen story from Indianapolis, Indiana, where a resident shot he didn't know it at the time, but he ended up shooting his cousin during an attempted home invasion. This was Sunday morning, about 4 a.m. The 3 individuals who targeted this home, all wearing masks, at least one of them armed anyway, targeted the home of Daryl Gibbs. He was asleep when he was jolted awake to the sound of gunshots, and then his son knocked on the door and said, "Hey, Dad, there's people trying to get inside the house." So he said, "I got dressed, I went out back." He said there was a busted door jammer. They were trying to kick in the door. It held long enough to hold them back. He said, "But I got bullet holes to the windows and the door window and to the door itself and the wall inside." Gibbs said his son exchanged gunshots with at least one man in the backyard. And when he investigated, he found that individual was still lying there. Gibbs said, "I saw the intruder laying there on the ground. He wanted me to make a call for him." And he said, you know me. As it turns out, he did. It was a cousin, a nephew, a son of one of his nephews. 24-year-old Matthew Kennard II told Gibbs that he couldn't feel his legs after the shooting. Said that Kennard also asked him to call his relatives. He said, "I used my phone to call 911 to get somebody out here, the ambulance for him and stuff. I even made a call to his grandmother with my phone and lifted up the speaker so he could talk to his girlfriend." He said, "If I seen him walking down the street, I couldn't have told you who he was. That's how often I've been around him." So apparently not close to his cousin. He said, "I don't really wish the worst on anybody, but I have no sympathy for anybody doing that. You don't do that to family. It shouldn't even be heard of, Well, you don't do it to strangers either, but unfortunately it happens all the time." Kennard, at last report, in a local hospital. Donald Gibbs' son was questioned by police at the scene, but was not taken into custody based on the account of his father. This would appear to be a pretty clear-cut case of self-defense, but we'll keep you updated on any more details as they become available. Finally today, in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing, a South Carolina man who was able to save the life of a couple of children from a house fire. 74-year-old man in Horry County, South Carolina, Ronald Chevalier, was on his porch just hanging out, enjoying the summer day when he heard screams. He said, "I saw the smoke and I went, get your brothers out." He said there was this thick wall of smoke coming out of the door behind this child. And he said when he saw this kid in distress, he jumped into action. He said, "I grabbed the fire extinguisher, pulled it off the wall, pulled the pin, ran across the street, made sure that the first child who had alerted him to the fire was okay. And then he went inside the home. There were 3 other children inside." He said, "The little one I carried out the door, I gave to the older boy. I said, 'Sit down on the stairs, stay there.' And then I went back in with the fire extinguisher." He said at that point, the smoke was so heavy he could barely see in front of him. He said he could see flames around the microwave. He said it's about an hour after the fire started, the children's parents showed up. They weren't there at the time. In fact, Christian Santos Amaya and Nubia Perez Maya, both charged with 4 counts of unlawful neglect of a child for leaving their young kids alone, 4 children under the age of 7 last Friday night. That's when the fire started. Chevalier says, "I'm not a hero, just a human being helping out some kids." Well, you can be both, I think. And the fact that these 4 children were unharmed when all 4 of them easily could have perished were it not for Ronald Chevalier's actions. Yeah, I think hero applies in this case. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program as always. I'm looking forward to seeing you back here tomorrow for our Wednesday Hump Day edition of Cam and Company. Again, talking with Dr. Robert Young from Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership. about the Surgeon General's new call to disarm, in the name of public safety. Actually, I'm sorry, in the name of public health. Excuse me. We're changing things up, aren't we? Yeah. Same list of action items, right, as when it's about public safety. Still got to ban the guns, still got to universal background checks. All the same recommendations, just a different package instead, right? Just a neat little bow wrapped on top. All right, we'll see you back here tomorrow. Until then, be sure to check out BarryandArms.com throughout the day. We're keeping you up to date on all of the latest Second Amendment news and information. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.